Hey, Dave.
Yeah, Randy?
Since we founded Bombas, we've always said our socks, underwear, and T-shirts are super soft. Any new ideas?
Maybe sublimely soft.
Or disgustingly cozy.
Wait, what?
I got it. Bombas. Absurdly comfortable essentials for yourself
and for those facing homelessness.
Because one purchased equals one donated.
Wow, did we just write an ad?
Yes.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/soft and use code SOFT for 20% off your first purchase.
Wendy's Coffee House.
I think what made me feel comfortable and finally willing to share these stories, which I think is big, it's taking me my whole life to finally willing to be open and share, is that there is an anomalous encounter clone personality type. When I found that, and they all have very similar, there's like 4 components in their childhood that tend to happen. They tend to have certain personalities, test the same way in certain psychological tests, and it just made me feel like I'm okay.
The book is Convergence, the Interconnection of Extraordinary Experiences. Barbara Mango, PhD, and Lynn Miller, MS. This is a story of several women who are experiencers, and also the science that would apply to the experience, and then other people who have chimed in basically from their own vantage point of what extraordinary experiences are. And it includes out-of-body, it includes UFO, it includes all sorts of stuff like that. But I wanted to introduce Barbara because she's local to Kansas City and had a UFO sighting when she was in Kansas City, 1966 in Shawnee. Can we start with that?
Yes. Yeah, it's great to show up in Kansas City. I'm so happy about that. Yeah, so I started having experiences when I was 2 years old. Instead of wondering if there was something, I always wondered when it was going to appear to me. So I never had any doubt that it existed whatsoever. And one day, it was in March, we were having a very, very unusually hot day. And it was in the 80s. I remember I had to put some shorts on and a T-shirt. And in my house on nice days in the spring was always yard work. That was the rule. And we had to go out and help my parents. Well, my father was outside with me. My mom and my sister were in the house making lunch, I think. It was around noon. So we were raking and I was sweating and I wasn't happy because I had to do yard work and that's no fun for a 10-year-old. And so as I'm sweating and I'm raking and I'm not happy that I'm having to do this, I suddenly wondered why all of a sudden it became so dark, because it was a beautiful, beautiful day. You know, one of those days where the sky is just gorgeous, blue and clear and no clouds. There were actually no clouds in the sky. So as I'm raking, I'm looking down, I noticed it got dark. Not dark like night dark, but dark. And I just dropped my rake and I looked up and I saw a disc. It was very, very thin disc. Probably if you took 2 shallow dinner plates and flipped them upside down together, that's what it looked like. But it was enormous. You know, I was a child, and in trying to remember exactly how large it is, you know, it's hard, and you don't want to use a child's imagination as an adult. But I do remember it being larger than a football field. And as an adult, I would have to guess it was probably between 1 to 2 football fields. So we're talking about between 1 and 200 yards.
Huge.
It was perfect. It was huge. It was perfectly round. But the thing that to me, and probably everyone else, because I do want to say, like, for those of you that live out there, you know, a lot of the suburbs, especially compared to the east where I live now, where we have a lot of acreage, the homes were on a quarter of a acre plot. So the houses were very close to one another. And all the neighbors were outside in their yards because it was such a beautiful day. So I remember I wasn't the only one looking up. Everybody was just staring at the sky, including my father and all the neighbors. But the one thing I think that we were so shocked is because it was so low. You could see it perfectly. And it was like a matte aluminum type of finish. I would say it was probably, and you know, it's hard to be accurate, maybe 500 feet up in the sky. It wasn't very high. I mean, you could see it so perfectly. And actually, I was little. I was only 10, so I was short. But I could tell that there were windows So if you have the two plates and turned upside, down, facing one another, very thin windows going around the whole circumference, like in the middle of it. And I was mesmerized. The other thing that I immediately thought was, oh my God, I'm out here raking. It's a beautiful day. All of a sudden there's a giant shadow, but I never heard anything. It just was there. It wasn't there. And then it was there. And then a shadow came where there hadn't been a shadow. And I just remember looking up at it, absolutely mesmerized. I had no fear whatsoever. Because I had mentioned before, I had my first, extraordinary experiences when I was around 2. So to me, this was like, oh my gosh, you finally, I've been wanting you to come and you finally came and you listened to me. Oh my gosh. And then I started receiving telepathic information. And I knew that whatever type of being was, in the craft was giving me a message. And to summarize it, I was being told that the first thing that was important for me to know was there were no harmful intentions. They were here like on a peace mission, an observation mission. And I remember them telling me, because this was in 1966, before we landed on the moon. But they were telling me, just as you're going to land on the moon soon and observe the moon, that's what we're doing to you. We mean you no harm, but the one thing we're really concerned about is that you're not taking care of the earth. And I had always felt that way myself. And I had no fear. I understood everything. It was with warp lightning speed, this conversation. But it was completely normal to me. I never thought, oh, this is weird. It was as normal to me as breathing. I understood everything that was said. And the last thing they said to me was, and I don't remember, I think they might have given me the year, was that we would be going to the moon soon and we would collect lunar dust and rocks to examine them because we would be curious about finding out about the moon. And in essence, that's what they were doing with us. And they just said, I wish you peace and you spread the word about what we told you. Never be scared of us. We're just here as observers. And I just kept staring and staring. And then all of a sudden it was gone. So it was there and then it wasn't. There was no acceleration. It just was and it wasn't. And I remember going over to my dad. I was only 10. I didn't know physics. Science was just the most basic thing when you're 10 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to my Dad, it didn't make any sound because it traveled faster than the speed of sound. And it also traveled faster than the speed of light. And that's why we couldn't see it arrive or depart. And he just looked at me and said, how do you know that? And I said, I don't know. I just know that. So I don't know. I can't remember if that's something else they had communicated to me or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I did understand that concept. And I didn't learn about, physics or whatever that would be categorized under until I was 14, which was 4 years later. And I do remember that it was briefly reported in the newspaper, but in my family, it was like poo-pooed. They didn't save anything from the paper. So years and years later, actually, when I was beginning to research from this book, a friend of mine said, did you ever check in Project Blue Book? I had never heard of Project Blue Book. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, it's declassified information. And if you're really patient and you comb through the enormous amounts of pages, you should be able to find your sighting. And I did. And I was, I had always believed it. I always knew in my heart I had seen it and it was part of my experiences. And I really didn't doubt it. But as an adult, all these years later, to find concrete, hard evidence, it just makes you feel better. So the particular page that I found stated that it was, oh gosh, I don't remember the day in March, but it was in March and it happened in Shawnee, Kansas. And most of the objects that were reported after they were investigated were either labeled like a weather balloon or an aircraft, a blimp. This one, though, it said unidentified, like they couldn't explain it. And so I took this to my friend who was an astronaut, and he said, that means it's the real thing. it's the real thing, Barbara. Yeah. And I was like, yes. But then I said, I already knew that, but I think I was a child, so I wanted as an adult to be able to go back and just say, hey, all those years ago, yes. And it was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
The website's extraordinaryexperiences.org. Convergence, the interconnection of extraordinary experiences, my guest, Barbara Mango. And I also want to get into the background for this book. We're going to get into that in the next break. Wendy's Coffee House.
And Lynn and I, we always say, this is our little saying, that the experiential has the same weight and the same importance as the science. They just need to be married.
Convergence, the interconnection of extraordinary experiences. My guest, Barbara Mango, and this is so fun because she's from the Kansas City area, all right? So this is close to home for a lot of us who are listening. And I wanted to just go back. That was an incredible sighting, and yes, you did name the date, 1966, and they told you at some point they wanted you to share it. So I wanted to just backtrack. How did that work, you sharing this information that they're here, or did you try?
It was really difficult. I pretty much stifled it and kept it to myself. My father had seen it. And even though my father didn't really believe in anything, out of the ordinary, he saw it and he couldn't deny it. But yet, when we tried to tell my mother and sister, they're like, yeah, you two are always exaggerating. That's a great story. Yeah, save it for another day. And at the time when I lived in Kansas City, it was, actually I grew up in the 60s, so it wasn't a time when people were talking about these things. And I remember I told one friend, and she just looked at me and goes, what's wrong with you? So I learned to just keep it to myself. And I really didn't talk about it very much unless I was in the presence of somebody who would talk about it. They would initiate the conversation, and then I'd chime in. So it really wasn't until this book that I openly shared it. I felt it was time, and I still am cautious about sharing things because that's one of the issues, I think, when you talk about the paranormal, the spiritual, the extraordinary, the inexplicable, you want to be taken seriously. I wanted to be taken seriously. So it was difficult for me to make a decision what things to talk about, take it back by science, and I could show the experiential and be taken seriously. So I really did I have to say I waited a long time to speak my truth about what I saw.
The fantastic thing now is that there is a lot of information corroborating experiencers, and that has to do with basically the more openness we have, the access we have with the internet and other things like that. John Mack did a tremendous service, and yet he was discredited, or they tried to discredit him. So he took a lot of flack for working with abduction experiencers, and the 1994 experience with all the children, the Ariel School. All of that happening is now coming. Basically, Ralph Blumenthal has a book about John Mack. The Experiencers is a film that I just did this interview with Stephen Alex, and he did a film with experiencers, the ones who John Mack wrote the book about, abduction. All this stuff right now is bringing it to the fore. What was this project about for you and your co-writer, Lynn?
Well, Lynn and I wanted to write a book, and we had four main reasons. We were trying to get across four main points. And the first is Lynn is a biology. She's a master's in biology, and I have a master's in PhD in metaphysics. But we're also both art majors, and Lynn has a psychology degree as well. So, but our main thing is that we're lifelong experiencers. Lynn mainly had out-of-body experiences, and she studied to master controlled out-of-body experiences. But through those experiences, she's had contact with non-human beings and all that. And she's also actively studied consciousness for like the last 10 years. And I've had experiences since I was 2. And I mean, I could talk for like 15 hours about those, but there's just so many. And I think, so first and foremost is we know how hard it is to go through life and have a variety of very different experiences and feel weird and feel like we're different and feel like we have to stifle them and we can't talk about them. but that's our normal. And it's really hard, at least for us, when we grew up, the time we grew up, that's what we had to do. It was very hard to navigate this when you couldn't speak openly about it. So we wanted to reach out to all the people that feel the same way, because there still are quite a few people in different parts of the country that carry this around with them, and they feel like there's something wrong with them. I've talked to many of them, and they just really don't know what to do with it. So that's one thing. We're trying to show them there's a like-minded community out there. It's okay to own it. You are different. You have different personality traits, and you're probably wired differently, but it's okay. The second thing is, because of our experiences, we came to like an early understanding of life, and not that as a child I could put it into words, but I had a basic grasp that consciousness isn't a part of your brain. You know, it's not localized in the brain. It's non-local, and it's eternal, and it's not brain-based. And as such, our consciousness connects with everything else in like our multidimensional universe. And so extraordinary experiences are such, right? And so we can have experiences by a non-local consciousness because it enables us contact and connect with other dimensions.
You have tried to include that science because this is all very contemporary. This is current. This is cutting edge.
Correct.
What we have discovered at the time, especially about consciousness, because that was the big question of where is consciousness, and science is still, back and forth over, do we think we've solved this issue? But for the most part, it is non-local. It is not a part of the brain. It is external.
Correct. Well, traditional science believes it's brain-based. Cutting-edge science, which believes in so that would be called local consciousness. But non-locality or non-local consciousness believes the brain is merely a receiver of consciousness. It's not a producer, it's a receiver. But Lynn and I, through our experiences, we experientially just knew this. And as we grew in our professional fields, we worked with scientists, we worked with academics, and we worked with researchers. And so most of them did not have experiences. They were very immersed in trying to prove them through quantum physics, quantum mechanics, mathematics, that type of thing. And Lynn and I were, wait a minute. Yes, that's very true. But look, we're experiencers and we have the other side. So we thought when we wrote the book, this is the other part, we need to marry the two. And we always say, this is our little saying, that the experiential has the same weight and the same importance as the science. They just need to be married. So that was another one of our main points we were trying to get across. The other was that these experiences, although they can take years to assimilate and they can be very difficult to handle and to work through, are nearly always positive and life-altering. And then the fourth thing we're trying to get across, and this is towards the end of the book, we spend a chapter talking about what do experiencers do? How do they handle these issues? Because medicine today, psychiatry, psychology, even the medical field, they're really not equipped to recognize the difference between a pathological patient and a patient that has had truly, extraordinary experiences. And too often these patients, when they mention what happened to them, and this especially relates to a near-death experience, they're immediately assumed that they're delusional or they're hallucinating. And I actually had a very close friend who had a near-death experience, and when she came back, she told the doctor, I saw God. She was so excited to tell the doctor, I saw God. And he committed her to the psych ward for 3 months. So that's another piece we're trying to say, that, look, we're experiencers. We've had firsthand, this is our world. We became wired like this. The experiential is just as important as the science, but it has to be backed by the science. They have to marry one another. That consciousness, cutting-edge consciousness shows that consciousness is non-local and non-brain-based. that these experiences are positive and that we need more patient-centered care. So people feel more free to speak about them, and they're treated with compassion and open-minded attitude.
The book covers a lot of territory, but it's all across the board. So if you've had a UFO experience, if you've had an out-of-body experience, if you've had an encounter with anything, a ghost, afterlife, that kind of thing, it's all part of the same thing. We're going to take a quick break. My guest is Barbara Mango, Wendy's Coffee House. Convergence, the interconnection of extraordinary experiences. Barbara Mango. And your background is in metaphysics as well. That's where your PhD, it says, in metaphysics. How did you choose? Because you said you started having experiences when you were about 2.
Well, this was about my 18th career. No, seriously. I had many previous careers. And what happened, I was working in education, was working with small children. I was actually in Head Start teacher. And I was chasing a small little child who was running up what we used to call a jungle gym. Wasn't supposed to be on there. I got to the top, trying to get to the child. I slipped and I fell 7 feet and landed flat on my back and broke my back. So I couldn't do anything physical at the time. I couldn't go back to work. It was very painful, but I said to myself, look, this is going to take a long time to heal. I have to go within because I can't be physical at the time. I'm going to either have to sit here and have a pity party for like 2 years, or I can really try to figure out what I can do, because I'm a learning nerd and I love to learn. What can I do? What can I study something? So I thought, what? Ever since I was a little child, I've been having experiences. And really, if you look at my life, yes, I've done, A, B, C, D, E, different jobs, but this is really who I am. And I thought, oh my God, it would be so amazing if I could find a degree program that I could actually study who I feel I am. I mean, right?
Yeah.
Like your soul is aligned with your work. Like, how amazing is that? So I spent 6 months looking into colleges because I needed to be so careful that it was fully accredited, and it wasn't one of these, not woohoo schools, but, on the fringe, right?
Uh-huh.
So I finally found a theology school because that's where these programs are offered. They're usually offered at a theology school. And it was a very progressive theology school, and they offered a degree in metaphysics. And I read all about it, and it included so many of the courses that are just, oh my God, I've had experiences in this and this and this. And it drew me. So I got my master's degree. I loved what I was studying so much. I never thought about getting a PhD. I mean, if I thought about getting a PhD, I probably would have had a heart attack, stressing about it. I can't even imagine, And then dissertation, oh my God.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that I was insatiable to learn more. I just loved it. I couldn't put the books down. I was walking around the house, with my nose in a book. It was insane. So I kept going and going and going and going. And then it was time to either write a dissertation and get my PhD if it passed, or say, okay, well, I got all the information I needed, so now I'm done. And I thought, you know what? I worked so hard, and this is the direction I want to take my life. I want to mesh my experiences with what I do. This is who I am. And I have never had such joy. I've never worked in any capacity where I have so much joy and I feel so authentic in what I do than this. I look at it like I'm studying the soul, and that's really who we all are. We're consciousness, whatever you would call the soul. I term it the soul. So it's just been the most gratifying, wonderful experience and choice of study for me.
You also had experiences where you have remembered past lives as a child. Did that past life experience have any impact on what your current incarnation is? Huge impact.
The huge impact, it was on many levels, but the main thing I took away from it is it caused a spontaneous phobic healing and a spontaneous physical healing. And this happened when I was in first grade. Basically, all of my past lives have happened while I'm fully conscious, and that's kind of scary because sometimes when I'm driving, I'm not kidding. It's very scary to know you're driving and all of a sudden you're popping into a past life. But this happened in a what I call a dream state, although I knew it wasn't a dream. just really briefly, when I was 6 years old in first grade, I had pneumonia. And I was sick for I believe it was 52 days, 52, 54 days. And I had been to the pediatrician back and forth, and they had put me on various medications, but nothing would get rid of the pneumonia. And I missed so much school. And the principal called my parents in and said, look, Barbara's right. She does well in school, but you can only miss 54 days of school, and we're going to have to hold her back. And so they were freaking out, and I was freaking out. And I believe it was that night when I went to sleep, I knew it wasn't a dream, okay? And there are many reasons why. When you have a past life memory while you're sleeping, you know it's not a dream. You know it's not a dream because you have incredibly heightened awareness that is nothing like a dream state. You have heightened senses, and I was able to see in, like, I would call it omnidirectional vision, like above, below. It was more than, human vision, 360 degrees. And I actually became the person in my past life. So basically, I was 6 years old. In the past life, I was also 6 years old. And I was a very wealthy little girl. And I saw little pieces of my life. In the first part, I was a small girl. I lived in England. I knew I was very, very wealthy. I had been taken away from my home because I knew that there was a tragic incident that had happened. And in this memory, I was being driven back to my home. And I was very, very sad, and I was very distraught, and I was scared to come home after a tragic incident, which I didn't remember what it was at the time. The next little clip I had was in the roaring 20s. Because when I first remembered, I knew it was 1901. I just knew it was 1901. Then I had a little vision of myself as a party girl. I knew I was probably in my 20s, and I loved to party, loved to drink, I loved to smoke, I loved to, just go crazy. Then in the final part of the dream, I believe I was in my 40s, and I was in a gorgeous home in England, the manor type home you'd see in royalty, these giant, they call them homes, but they're really,
yes,
castles.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I was looking out the window, and I was feeling overwhelmed, crushed with sadness, devastated, because I had just been given I had been told I had a terminal lung cancer, and I was going to die. And what was so difficult for me as a child was it was happening in multi-dimensions, like I said. Like, I could see the small child, I could see the adult dancing, I could see the woman looking out of a window, pondering, what am I going to do? Oh my God, I was just told I was going to die. With multi-directional vision, I could look down on them, I could see them straight, I could look underneath them. But what really freaked me out as a kid is I became them emotionally. It's almost like I slipped into their body and I was them. Mm-hmm. And I was feeling every emotion that they were feeling, and I was thinking their thoughts. So for a little girl, 6 years old, to be in a woman's body, knowing that she was given a terminal lung cancer diagnosis, that was really hard for me. And I knew it wasn't a dream. And I remember thinking during that, this can't be a dream because I'm 6 years old and I don't know what that's like. How can I know what that feels like? So the next morning I woke up and I felt great, and I didn't have a fever, and I wasn't coughing, and I knew why. For some reason, I had been carrying around this past life. A woman had died of lung cancer.
And we'll continue with the past life story in the next break. Wendy's Coffee House. The past life story continues. Barbara Mango.
For some reason, I had been carrying around this past life. A woman had died of lung cancer. That's what I was dealing with, right? Upper respiratory. It was pneumonia. And my mother took me to the doctor, and he said, I don't know what happened. I can't explain it. You don't have pneumonia anymore. And I said to myself, because I knew I couldn't tell my mom, and I didn't want to say it to the doctor. I felt like saying, I know why.
Yeah,
Like the little kid in class that raises their hand. I know why. I had somehow processed that life, and whatever reason, I hadn't been able to get rid of the lung issue or whatever it represented to me. And I was free. I was completely cleared. Later on, I did have a past life regression because I couldn't remember why I was taken away from my home. And it's because my father had been murdered and he had been stabbed to death. And my mom had actually had a nervous breakdown and had to be sent away. I was sent to a relative's house until things calmed down. And when I had my past life regression, I did remember that my father had been stabbed. And my phobic healing was that I've always had a horrific, irrational fear of knives. Like, I mean, so over the top. Like if I saw somebody cutting, my mother cutting, like cutting up a carrot or dicing onions, I would start freaking out. I'd have to run out of the room. I was just terrified. My palms would start sweating. So the second that I had that past life regression and I remembered that, I went home and I was perfectly fine. I mean, I could look at a knife. I could pick up a knife. No problem whatsoever. So it was very, 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 very powerful, but I had to keep it inside. And that one was difficult for me because, like I say, how as a child, as a little child, 6 years old, what do you do with those feelings of sadness and loss and facing death? When I viewed myself towards the end of my life, I didn't know what to do with that. It was very confusing and very upsetting. And I was so scared because I remember saying to myself, I should not know what that feels like. I'm 6 years old. And I couldn't tell anybody. That was very, very hard for me. It was very enlightening. And it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life because I knew I had transcended space-time. And like I said, to be able to sort of live multidimensionally, like I knew I was me having a quote dream, but I also became the other woman, having feelings I wasn't capable of, seeing in like omnidirectional, with omnidirectional vision. Everything was heightened and clarified and perfectly clear. And as a 6-year-old, I didn't know anything about historical eras. I did not know how people dressed. I didn't know how homes were decorated. I didn't know what type of cars they drove. But as I got older and I looked, every single thing in my dream was historically accurate. The clothing was historically accurate. The house was historically accurate. So it was just so many things a 6-year-old couldn't know. And it left me so confused and just really distressed for quite a while.
You have so many experiences, and that's what this book is full of. A lot of different experiences, how to reconcile them, support groups. But I wanted to ask you about the death experience that I read about, and this is with the collaboration, the book from Penny Satori. Was it a shared death experience with your father?
It's what they call nearing death experience. And basically, to sum it up, my father was a hardcore atheist, just did not believe in anything, poo-pooed anything spiritual. And, I've been a lifelong experiencer. He was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer that had metastasized when he was 88. And after, in and out of hospitals, he was finally brought home and put in hospice. I live in Connecticut. He lived in Florida outside of Miami. So I was flying down constantly. And because I believe what I believe, and I'm familiar with the near-death experience, and nearing-death awareness is very similar. It's just you're not brought back. You're not resuscitated. So you're having the same experiences, so to speak, as a near-death experiencer. It's just you're sharing them as you're leaving, not when you're coming back. So my father and I wanted him to have a very dignified, peaceful, compassionate passing. And his hospice bed was placed in our family room, and that was kind of like the hubbub central. And the hospice staff was there, and my mother was there, and my mother was she couldn't handle it. And she did not have the understanding that people that are dying speak in symbolic language. Like my father would say, oh, the beings of light are waiting for me. They can't wait to throw me a party. They're so excited I'm coming home. And my mother and some other relatives would yell and scream at my father and tell him he was just totally imagining it. And he was crazy and it was the drugs. And he would become so distressed that he would crash. every time this happened to him, he would crash, and hospice would have to call in the physician. Like, he would develop a fever, or he'd have trouble breathing. So I would sit at my father's bed, and I would listen to him, just listen compassionately, and tell him I understood exactly what he was saying. And we talk about it. I'd say, what do the beings look like? Can you describe them? What are they saying to you? Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I hear you. I believe you. I would hold his hand. I'd encourage him to talk about it. And it was so incredibly, unbelievably healing. He, at the very end, he started believing. He went from being an atheist to seeing. He said, Barbara, all the things that you've been talking about your whole life, well, from what I did share, he said, you know what? They're true. He said, I believe them now. He said, because I'm seeing them. He said, I'm seeing light beings. And then this is what he said that just, I couldn't believe it. He said, I'm going back and forth between two dimensions. He said, I keep waking up and I'm here on earth in my bed. And then I'm going to another dimension beyond the physical body. And I was like, oh my God. And he got it. And so he was able to go with such peace. And I felt like the biggest gift I could give him was just to be there for him and hear him and validate him. It wasn't necessarily that I shared in a near-death experience, but I shared understanding and I shared compassion. I was able to give him great comfort when those around me were not. Because I entitled my chapter The Gift of Being, because I think that's the most important thing you can do when someone is dying, just to be there in a very compassionate, caring, open-minded way, encourage dialogue. And even if you can't accept that the phenomena is real, you have to understand it's very real to the dying patient, and you have to honor that.
Absolutely. We're out of time. What do you recommend for the next step for somebody who might be, for the first time, coming out of the closet with their own experience?
What I would like everybody to know, and one of the things in the book, is that all these experiences are interconnected, and they're all what you call spiritually transformative experiences. So there are organizations, and one of them is Ibn Alexander. He was a physician that had a near-death experience. He has founded Eterna, which is based spiritually transformative based experiences. And then there is IANDS, it's IANDS, and there are a worldwide international organization that not only research and study and collect stories. They have an annual conference. They deal with near death. They also deal with any spiritually transformative experience. I would suggest anybody who really, really wants to learn about any type of spiritually transformative experience to go to ENDERF. That is NDERF. It's the Near Death Experience Research Foundation, founded by Dr. Jeffrey Long. They have resources. They have a library. They have case studies. You can be a research participant. There's links to everything. And there's just so many resources in the back of the book. A friend of mine named Mary Wadwell, who lives in Australia, she counsels. She's specifically a hypnotherapist and a counselor who helps experiencers with any type of unidentified aerial phenomena or contact experience, work through their feelings. There's a huge support system out there. I didn't actually know about it until I started researching. So if you go to the back of the book, there's several pages of resources. There's always a group of like-minded people who share and listen with compassion and support, so you don't have to feel alone.
Barbara Mango, I really appreciate you sharing the Shawnee story, that UFO in Shawnee.
I was really happy to share that story because I have such an affinity for Kansas City. So yes, it was pretty amazing that I had it while I lived there.
The book is Convergence, the Interconnection of Extraordinary Experiences, and the website, extraordinaryexperiences.org. Thanks for listening.